Hello my dear friends, have you ever wondered what happens after the greatest flood that ever washed the earth, leaving destruction and silence in its wake? This is your own story, the story of every child of Adam, and today we will travel through a time when humanity was shattered and the earth itself seemed to grieve. The Bible tells us that the flood came because the earth was filled with violence and corruption that was unbearable before God, and He brought the waters to cleanse the world. The Torah mentions the same in great detail, describing how Noah and his family were chosen to survive because they were righteous. The Quran speaks of this flood as a test of faith and patience, warning mankind of the consequences of their sins. Imagine the world after the flood. The waters had receded slowly, revealing broken homes, shattered trees, and the carcasses of animals that had not survived the wrath of the waters. There was silence everywhere, so deep and haunting that even the birds seemed afraid to sing. The ground was soaked and muddy, the sky gray and crying, and the first steps of humanity on this silent earth were filled with fear and uncertainty. Who would lead now? Who would teach? Who would rebuild the life that had been washed away? And in this silence there was still an evil lurking, a force that had survived the waters that had drowned millions, a force that had been whispered about in the shadows, a being of darkness that refused to bow even to the wrath of God. Yes, my friends, this is the story of Iblis, the evil that could not be drowned. The Bible speaks of the unseen evil that tempts humanity even after great calamities. The Torah warns about the forces that resist the cleansing of the earth. The Quran makes it clear that Iblis vowed to misguide mankind, and he found his opportunity after the flood to whisper into the ears of the vulnerable souls who had survived the destruction. Noah emerged from the ark, his heart heavy with sorrow for the lost souls. He looked at his family and the few living beings with gratitude, but also with fear, because he knew that the battle between good and evil was far from over. The earth was silent, but the whispers of temptation had begun. Iblis walked among the ruins, invisible to the human eye, yet fully aware of the minds he could corrupt. The innocent children of Adam, who had never known the true cruelty of deception, were now his playground, and he relished in this dark freedom. The rivers that once carried death now reflected the faces of survivors who struggled to understand the enormity of what had happened. They looked at the remains of their neighbors, their friends, and even their animals with tears in their eyes, and they asked themselves how they would ever rebuild life again. The Bible reminds us that even in devastation there is hope, that the chosen ones must carry the legacy forward. The Torah emphasizes the importance of obedience and righteousness even when everything seems lost. The Quran tells us to hold on to faith and remember that those who endure the trials with patience will be rewarded. Iblis, however, was patient and cunning. He knew that the human heart is fragile and that grief and despair are the perfect seeds for evil. He began whispering doubts and fears into the minds of men and women, teaching them lies disguised as truths. He made them question the purpose of survival. Why should we rebuild what was destroyed? Why should we worship when God allowed this suffering to happen? Little did they know that these thoughts were the chains of darkness being laid carefully around their hearts. The survivors gathered their strength slowly. They looked at each other with fear and determination. Noah spoke to them about obedience to God and about the lessons from the flood. He reminded them of the covenants written in the Torah. In the Bible and the Quran, the children of Adam began to rebuild their homes. They planted crops and gathered animals. They prayed and offered thanks, yet in the night they felt shadows around them, a presence that chilled their hearts. Because Iblis never sleeps, he waits, he watches, he knows the weak and preys on the broken and confused. Every action was now a test of faith, every choice a struggle between light and darkness. Some survivors succumbed to fear and despair and began following whispers that promised relief from grief. Others held on to hope and walked with courage and the understanding that they are chosen to rebuild the earth. Noah's family became the pillars of guidance. They taught others what had been lost, the sacred stories from the holy books of Bible, Torah, and Quran. They reminded humanity that obedience, kindness, and patience are stronger than even the most cunning evil. But the silence of the earth remained haunting at night. When the wind blew through the broken trees, it sounded like the whispers of those lost souls mixed with the laughter of Iblis, who knew that the seeds of temptation had taken root. This part of the story is the most emotional, for it shows how fragile humanity can be, how easily despair can lead one into darkness, yet it also shows the courage of those who resist, who cling to faith, who refuse to let evil claim their hearts. Friends, have you ever felt that kind of silence when the world around you seems dead, when grief and fear fill the air in such thick layers that it suffocates hope? This is what the survivors of the flood felt. They mourned their losses, they cried for the dead, and they feared the unseen presence that had survived the waters. They were reborn into a world both empty and dangerous, where love and evil walked side by side. Iblis observed them closely. He saw the righteous and the weak. He learned the patterns of human hearts and began planning for the future. He knew he could not destroy all humanity at once, because the chosen ones protected by God would always rise to spread the light. So he settled for subtlety. He would guide the ignorant into sin. He would plant doubt and arrogance. He would make humans question themselves and their faith, so the battle would never end. And the lesson is clear: even after divine punishment, evil finds a way to survive and tempt those who remain. Noah continued his mission. He taught his children about God, about obedience, about hope and patience, and about the evil that lurks even after catastrophe. He reminded them of the stories from the Bible, Torah, and Quran, so they would never forget, and he warned them to always be vigilant, because the quietest moments are often when evil strikes the hardest. Have you ever felt that heaviness in your chest when the world seems empty and every step forward feels like walking on shattered glass? This is exactly what the survivors of the Great Flood felt. This is your story, the story of the children of Adam who faced a silent earth and an evil that could not be drowned. The Bible reminds us that even after punishment, the human heart can be tempted, and that vigilance is always required. The Torah warns that evil never rests and always seeks the vulnerable. The Quran tells us that Iblis vowed to mislead mankind, and he found his playground in the hearts of the broken. The survivors walked cautiously across the muddy lands. They looked at the broken trees and the blackened soil and wondered how life could ever return to normal. They wept for the neighbors who had been swept away, for friends and animals, for entire generations lost. They prayed to God with tears streaming down their faces, seeking guidance, mercy, and the strength to rebuild. Yet in the shadows, Iblis moved unseen, his whispers like cold wind into the ears of men and women who struggled to understand why they had survived and what they were meant to do with this second chance. Iblis spoke softly, making them doubt the purpose of obedience. Why should we honor God when He allowed this destruction? Why should we follow the lessons of the holy books when death has claimed so many? The Bible says that the heart of man is easily deceived by subtle lies. The Torah shows that temptation comes when grief is greatest, and the Quran warns that Iblis seeks to turn hearts away from truth and into darkness. These whispers planted fear, confusion, and anger in the minds of those who had survived the flood. Noah gathered his family and spoke to them with urgency. He told them, this is not just survival, this is a test. This is the moment when humanity must rise stronger, wiser and faithful. He reminded them of the promises in the Torah about obedience and kindness, the lessons in the Bible about righteousness and mercy, and the commands of the Quran about patience and faith. Noah's words were like a torch in the dark, guiding those who were willing to listen, but the shadows were strong and Iblis was patient. Every day became a struggle. The survivors worked to rebuild shelters, plant crops and tend animals, yet every night the whispers grew louder. Iblis encouraged hatred, jealousy and pride. He taught some to steal from neighbors, to betray and to turn away from God. He was clever, subtle and relentless, but not all succumbed. Some remained steadfast, their hearts filled with hope and trust in the divine guidance. They held on to the lessons of the holy books and taught others to resist the temptations of Iblis. They reminded each other that survival alone was not enough, that righteousness and patience must guide every action. As the seasons changed, the earth slowly healed, the rivers cleared, the soil regained life and green sprouts pushed through the mud. Yet the scars of the flood remained deep in the hearts of humans and in the land itself. They remembered the silence, the darkness and the cries of the lost. The Bible calls this remembrance a source of wisdom. The Torah says this memory teaches obedience and humility, and the Quran tells us to hold on to these lessons to avoid repeating the mistakes that led to the flood. Iblis watched quietly, planning his next moves. He could not destroy all humanity because the chosen ones protected by God stood firm, yet he learned from every act of fear, every betrayal, every lie planted in human hearts. He studied patience and cunning. He learned how to use sorrow and hope together, how to twist desire and fear to serve his purpose. Yet he could not touch those who clung tightly to faith. The children of Adam who carried the torch of knowledge and righteousness were his greatest obstacle, and he had to be careful, for one wrong move could reveal his presence. Despite the darkness, humanity began to thrive, slowly rebuilding communities, sharing knowledge and passing the stories of the flood from generation to generation. They told of Noah's obedience, courage and faith. They told of the animals and the ark and the mercy of God, and they warned each other about Iblis and the dangers of temptation. The Bible describes this as the enduring strength of the righteous. The Torah calls it the legacy of obedience, and the Quran describes it as the triumph of faith over evil, even in the midst of great calamity. The emotional weight of these days was overwhelming. Humans wept not just for the lost but for the responsibility that survival demanded, for the courage needed to resist whispers of darkness, for the strength to rebuild trust and community, for the clarity to know good from evil in a world where the earth itself had been silenced and the shadow of Iblis walked unseen. This part of the story is heart-wrenching, yet it is filled with hope, because the human spirit, when guided by faith, can endure even the deepest sorrow and the most cunning evil. Children of Adam listened carefully to their elders. They memorized the lessons from the Bible, Torah and Quran. They prayed together, taught one another and helped each other resist the temptation to despair and anger. They celebrated small victories like a new home built, a field of crops sprouting, or a child laughing for the first time since the flood. Yet every night they knew the whispers had not stopped. Iblis waited for moments of weakness, moments of distraction, moments when hope faltered. But this is the lesson, my friends. This is why this story is yours to hear and understand, because it shows that even in silence and devastation, even when evil survives and walks among you with cleverness, patience and cunning, there is hope, there is a path, there is a choice. The children of Adam chose righteousness. Some stumbled, some fell, some resisted, and some rose stronger, and the earth itself began to breathe again, slowly recovering under the hands of those who clung to faith. The air filled with cautious laughter and songs of resilience. Iblis did not vanish, he became a shadow in human hearts, whispering doubts in times of grief, pride in times of success, envy in times of abundance. He became the reminder that survival is not enough, that vigilance and faith must guide every action. The Bible calls this the continuing battle of the human heart. The Torah calls it the test of vigilance and wisdom, and the Quran warns that those who forget God and the lessons of the past are vulnerable to deception. And so, my friends, as the survivors walked on this silent earth, rebuilding their homes, planting seeds, raising children, they carried the knowledge of the past and the presence of evil in their hearts. They learned that despair is dangerous, that hope is precious, that faith is powerful, and that Iblis always waits for the opportunity to mislead the weak. This is your story, the story of every son and daughter of Adam, and the lessons are yours to carry forward. Have you ever wondered if evil can truly be defeated, or if it only waits patiently for moments of weakness? This is your story, the story of every son and daughter of Adam. After the flood, the earth slowly healed, but the shadow of Iblis walked unseen. The Bible tells us that temptation never rests, that even after judgment humans must remain vigilant. The Torah calls it a test of obedience and discernment. The Quran warns that Iblis is cunning, patient, and relentless. He vowed to mislead mankind, and he kept his promise. The survivors had rebuilt homes and planted fields, yet their hearts were heavy with the knowledge that evil lurked among them. Every shadow seemed darker, every whisper of doubt louder, every night more haunting than the last. Iblis knew that to conquer humanity he did not need to destroy the earth, he only needed to plant despair in hearts, to make humans question their faith. He used grief, anger, jealousy, and pride like sharpened tools to carve paths into the human mind. The Bible speaks of the subtlety of evil. The Torah warns against deceit in the heart, and the Quran reminds that Iblis uses every weakness to misguide the children of Adam. Noah and his family taught tirelessly. They reminded the survivors of the mercy and justice of God. They told stories from the Bible, Torah, and Quran about obedience, faith, and perseverance. They taught that the flood was not the end, it was a beginning, that humans were entrusted with the earth and with the knowledge to rebuild, that every choice matters and every act of kindness is a weapon against the whispers of darkness. The children of Adam listened. They wept and they prayed. They helped one another resist the temptations, and slowly strength returned to their hearts. Yet Iblis was clever. He did not attack openly. Instead, he whispered doubts in moments of loneliness and fatigue. He made the righteous question their decisions. He encouraged envy between families and communities. He planted seeds of fear that slowly grew into anxiety and anger. He whispered, "Why should you work so hard? Why should you care for others when life is so cruel?" The Bible calls this cunning evil. The Torah calls it the corruption of the heart, and the Quran warns that Iblis thrives on distraction and weakness of faith. Humans struggled, some fell, some resisted, and some learned to turn the whispers into reminders, to pray stronger, to be more vigilant, to care more deeply for one another. The survivors discovered that faith, when combined with action, can withstand even the most persistent temptation, that community and shared guidance create strength, that solitude and despair weaken. They taught their children the stories of the flood of Noah, the mercy of God, and the cunning of Iblis, so that the lessons would endure for generations to come. The earth slowly became vibrant again. The rivers flowed, the trees grew leaves and fruits, the animals multiplied, and the air carried the songs of birds. Yet the scars of the flood remained a constant reminder of what can happen when evil prevails and humanity falters. The survivors honored these scars as teachers. They told their children, never forget the silence, never forget the cries of the lost. The Bible teaches remembrance is wisdom. The Torah teaches it is vigilance, and the Quran teaches it is guidance to resist deception. Iblis continued his quiet work, never leaving the hearts that clung to faith but focusing on those moments when despair tempted the weak, when anger misled the confused, when pride blinded the arrogant. He learned patience from every failed attempt, from every whisper that was resisted. He knew that the children of Adam who remembered the lessons of Noah would always rise, but he relished every small victory, every doubt, every moment he could make a human question their path. The survivors created a new way of life guided by faith, compassion, and vigilance. They prayed and celebrated, they mourned and healed, they built homes and communities that taught respect, courage, and endurance. They told stories from the Bible, Torah, and Quran so that the knowledge of past mistakes would guide future generations. They understood that survival alone is not enough, that humanity must nurture righteousness to guard against darkness, that even after devastation, hope and faith must be unwavering. And this is the essence of your story, my friends, the children of Adam who faced the silent earth and the evil that could not be drowned, who learned to resist despair and whispers of darkness, who rebuilt life with courage, patience, and faith. Every step a lesson, every tear a guide, every action a choice to resist or surrender. The Bible tells us that vigilance is sacred, the Torah tells us obedience is eternal, and the Quran tells us that faith is the shield against Iblis, and those who remember these lessons become strong pillars of humanity. So as you hear this story, remember this is your story, your own inheritance from Adam to the present. Every struggle, every temptation, every act of courage belongs to you. The whispers of Iblis may try to reach your heart even today, but the lessons remain clear. Resist despair, hold on to hope, act with kindness and faith, and remember that every child of Adam has the power to overcome darkness even after the greatest calamity, even when evil walks unseen among you. And finally, my dear friends, this story is yours to carry forward. This channel, this journey through the lives of Noah and the children of Adam is your own. It is meant to awaken your heart to the eternal struggle between light and darkness, to teach you the lessons of faith, patience, and vigilance, to show you that even after devastation hope can flourish, and that evil can only prevail if we forget the lessons of the past and abandon the teachings of the holy books. So hold these lessons close and share them with others, and remember, every choice you make shapes the path of humanity. This is your story, this is your inheritance, and every moment you listen and reflect is a step in understanding how you reached here from Adam to the present.